Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, dear devotees, for joining us for this wonderful reading of the Great Transcendental Adventure, getting all the devotees ready for the beautiful festival of the 50th anniversary of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath. So continuing on from yesterday, Srila Prabhupada had chosen well to describe Krishna consciousness as a novel idea. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had used the same term, implying something hitherto unknown, new or unusual, in his last instructions sent in a letter to Prabhupada only 2 weeks before leaving this world in 1937. I have every hope, he had said, that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's great hope was no empty wish. He had read and appreciated a poem written by Prabhupada in 1935, in which he had proved that he had understood the mind and mission of his spiritual master. In the poem, Prabhupada described the plight of humanity. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls, paying most heavy, the illusion's toll. Darkness around, all untrace, the only hope, his divine grace. The fallen souls had forgotten their original service relationship with God. Thus they were loitering in the material world. And just as a confidant of the Father sometimes visits a wayward child with a message to remind him of his real home, Prabhupada described his spiritual master as a messenger from Lord Chaitanya. Message of service thou hast brought, a healthful life as Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, it's full of grace. That's your gift, your divine grace. It was clear that Krishna consciousness was this previously unknown message of service and reviving the sleeping souls to their real waking identity as Krishna's long-lost servants was the business of the Vaishnava preacher. Fully awake, the fallen souls could therefore taste this previously unknown life, Krishna consciousness, as full of grace. Prabhupada had concluded his poem. The line of service, as drawn by you, is pleasing and healthy like morning dew. The oldest of all, built in a new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. Krishna consciousness was Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, and as such could accurately be described as the oldest of all. But the powerful preaching mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in the shape of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's International Society for Krishna Consciousness was now appearing in the world in a new dress. Just as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had great hope in Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada now had great hope in his young disciples in Australia. Now it was up to them to administer this novel idea to the people in general, very magnificently. Prabhupada gave a hint about the magnificent scale of things to come in Australia. I wish, he wrote to Bali Mardan, that you establish at least 10 centres in Australia or in the adjoining islands. That is my desire. One day Upendra and Bali Mardan discovered the domain, a vast, well-kept expanse of parkland dotted with sprawling old fig trees near the city. The domain was well known as a park for the people, where for years thousands had flocked to watch cricket matches and military reviews. More recently, the domain had been host to protests against the presence of nuclear bases and Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. Within walking distance of their small temple, it came alive every Sunday afternoon, offering instant crowds that eagerly gathered around anyone who had something to say. Philosophers, evangelists, political activists and popular heroes would proselytize atop ladders in the same way as Speaker's Corner at London's Hyde Park. As the devotees arrived each week, dozens of speakers would already be standing atop ladders and boxes. They promoted a vast array of doctrines: creationism, rationalism, pacifism, republicanism, to name but a few. Fundamental Christians with banners proclaiming, "You must be born again," and "The end is nigh," vied for attention with other real and quasi-religious preachers. Communists and anarchists stood beside Irish revolutionaries and old Aboriginals singing songs, while members of the Flat Earth Society displayed their pamphlets and posters. Other groups held placards proclaiming, "Populate or perish, keep Australia white, say no to yellow peril, Dagos, wogs and wops, and even kill a commie for Christ." One especially popular speaker was Webster, an intense and loud-mouthed man who amused, taunted, and verbally assaulted his audience with a seemingly endless array of pseudo-intellectualism and philosophical hodgepodge. Until the devotees started coming, Webster would regularly draw the biggest crowds. The devotees soon began to give him stiff competition, much to his chagrin. After chanting and addressing the crowd for some time, Upendra, or Bali Madan, would extend an open invitation to the crowd to return with them to the temple for a loved feast. The devotees would then walk back across the grasslands, followed by an assortment of hippies and free spirits, past the wharves and up to the staircase on the cliff face that led to the quaint old temple at Potts Point. Upendra, an excellent cook, regularly spent Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning preparing an assortment of tasty dishes: rice, vegetables, salted peanuts with raisins, buttery halva, a thick, cold sweet rice. These were served to guests in small teaspoonful quantities. On special occasions, Upendra would prepare sweet balls, gulab jamuns, just like Srila Prabhupada had shown him. He would stay up late Saturday night, slowly deep frying the small balls in ghee on a low heat until they had turned golden brown and full. Then, one by one, he would lift them out of the ghee with a slotted spoon and soak them in thick sugar syrup. Upendra took pleasure in informing the guests that Prabhupada had named the sweets ISKCON bullets because they were weapons in the war against Maya. Srila Prabhupada had originally adopted the name Love Feast back in 1966. Prabhupada had told the devotees that such feasts for the public should become an important part of ISKCON. As he had explained many times, food offered to Krishna becomes spiritual, and whoever eats the prasadam receives great spiritual benefit. So Krishna's mercy in the form of delicious prasadam became a weekly regular event in Sydney. So here we go. Chris, I was coming home from work one night. I had to take the subway to work, and I was being spewed out of Wynyard Station onto George Street in downtown Sydney with thousands of other commuters. I had to make a right turn in order to catch a bus to Potts Point, where we were living at the time in a basement apartment. A little flash of colour caught the corner of my eye, and I turned and saw my first devotee, whose name I later learnt was Upendra. He was wearing a turban, so I didn't notice the shaven head immediately. He wore a yellow robe, and the sleeveless sweater that Upendra was so fond of wearing. He was standing, beaming his typical cherubic smile, with the Back to Godhead magazine extended. I asked him, "What's this all about?" He told me that made a lot of sense to me, hooked me in, if you will. He said that love of God is a dormant propensity in the heart of every living being, not only spirit souls and human bodies, but everything that is animated. He also said that love of God can be awakened by the chanting of Hare Krishna, just as a seed is nourished by water, he said. Similarly, the seed of love of God is nourished by chanting Hare Krishna. There was a businessman passing by quite close to where we were standing off to the side of the sidewalk, and Upendra leaned forward and said, "Hare Krishna," into the right ear of this fellow as he walked by. This was a demonstration, I suppose, of the watering process. He explained to me that it was inconsequential whether or not that man understood the import of the sound vibration entering his ear. The effect was there anyway. God and his name were absolute. Upendra gave me a card and invited me to the temple that evening. The quaint little four-roomed house with blue hessian-covered walls and panoramic views of Sydney had become the venue for classes on Bhagavad Gita held on Monday, Wednesday and Friday evenings. It so happened that the temple was just around the corner from where Chris and Christine were living. They had planned to go to another yoga meeting that night, but on returning, Chris told Christine, "Let's not go to this other meeting. Let's go to the one just around the corner." "Chris, I remember walking into that tiny room. That was their main temple area. As the fog of incense cleared, I saw the shaven heads for the first time. But I didn't really get a feeling that it was all that strange, as a lot of people might have done when they walk into such an alien environment. When I heard Upendra lecture, I found him a very, very charismatic and magnetic speaker. He was so accomplished as to present the philosophy in a crystal clear way. I could not dispute anything he said, and was very curious and eager to find out more. Christine was not so immediately philosophically convinced. Why were they dressed up as Indians, she thought. And besides, she found sitting cross-legged in a micro miniskirt an acrobatic impossibility. At one point in the talk, she giggled at something Upendra said. Chris turned and told her to keep quiet. In deference to him, she kept silent for the rest of the evening and tried to understand what it was all about. Chris bought a newly arrived Back to Godhead magazine that night and began regularly attending the Sunday feasts. On the 12th of April, the Sydney daily newspaper, the Sun Herald, published a comprehensive report on the Sydney devotees. The article, entitled Hare Krishna Temple at Potts Point, was accompanied by a photo of an austere-looking Bali Mardan sitting cross-legged on the floor with a mridanga drum, speaking to the bearded reporter who sat submissively nearby. Upendra sat beside a simple altar, which appeared to be only a couple of boxes on top of one another, covered with some plain cloth, and adorned with 2 candle holders and various pictures. The reporter, Chris Pritchard, wrote an accurate and honest account of his visit to the temple. This week I spent a day in the first Sydney temple of the Hare Krishna religion. Introduced to Australia last month, the faith was taken from India to the United States 4 years ago. It has grown to its present position of having tens of thousands of members, as well as buildings and farms throughout North America and Europe. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness has established its Australian headquarters in an old rented house at Potts Point. The sweet smell of incense drifts out onto the alley outside the blue-painted dwelling. In the garden are 2 young men, both Americans, one married and one a bachelor, dressed in long robes, clasping their hands in front of them. They stroll slowly up and down the garden, chanting sounds familiar to most Australians under the age of 25. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The chant is well known, of course, because it is featured in one of the songs from the musical Hair, but very few of the young who hear it associate it with the Hare Krishna religion. Inside the house, a man, following an Indian recipe, cooks a vegetarian meal of rice and vegetable balls. In another room, a group of Australians listen to Hare Krishna music. I slip off my shoes and follow the 2 Americans into the holiest room, the temple of Hare Krishna. We sit, feet crossed, in front of the altar, which is decorated with pictures of Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, international leader of the faith, and the man who took it from its home in India to the rest of the world. I ask them their names. The one with glasses stops playing his drum and says, "We dropped our American names when we became full-time Hare Krishna missionaries last year. I am Bali Mardan Das, and my friend is Upendra Das. We were given the task of coming to Australia to set up 10 Hare Krishna centers in preparation for a visit here at the end of the year by our world leader. Our start here has been small and our pockets are empty, our diet frugal, but look at what happened in Britain. We had no support last year, but now we are filling every crevice of a 5-story building we bought from the Salvation Army." The 2 former university students studied Eastern religions and found themselves attracted to the Hare Krishna movement. They admitted openly that their beliefs and demands may be too great for most people. "We don't smoke or drink. Even tea is taboo, and gambling is not allowed. Drugs and illicit sex are also forbidden. Upendra Das and Bali Mardan are aware that hippies find their philosophies attractive, but few of the hippies are prepared to surrender their own desires to the simple tastes of Hare Krishna. Ours is a religion of joy, though," says Upendra Das. Willie Funtner, a tall, thin Swede with long blonde hair and a Viking mustache, was walking through King's Cross late on Easter Friday night when he saw a big crowd next to the Alameen fountain. As he walked closer, he heard the chanting more clearly and immediately recognized the words. Willie, my friend Jorgen Sundvall, and I had been traveling from Sweden to Australia. On the way, we had picked up a record album by the Fugs with a track featuring Allen Ginsberg chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. We chanted it constantly as we trekked across Nepal. Bali Mardan sold me a pamphlet on chanting Hare Krishna that night, and I brought it home. Jorgen was also very interested. On the pamphlet it said, Love Feast every Sunday, 4:30 p.m., 26 Horton's Place, Potts Point. So we went. They were happy to find that the devotees read the same edition of Bhagavad Gita as they did. In Afghanistan, someone had given them Prabhupada's blue abridged Bhagavad Gita as it is, and they had both been reading it. I was also reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Bali Mardan took me into the veranda that overlooked the city and proceeded to smash all my philosophical ideas. I thought he was really heavy, but over prasadam he changed. He was actually a really nice person. Willie and Jorgen began chanting on beads. The philosophy started making sense, and they liked the association of devotees. They both regularly smoked marijuana, but by chanting they found themselves gradually losing the taste for their hedonistic lifestyle. They were attracted to Krishna consciousness, but they couldn't make a firm commitment. Bill was regularly helping Upendra in the kitchen and would delight in hearing him speak of the early days of Krishna consciousness in America. As Upendra busied himself stirring pots of vegetables and preparing a variety of savoury items, Bill would roll Simply Wonderfuls, confections made from sugar, butter and powdered milk for the Sunday feast. Bill liked this association with Upendra and especially loved prasadam, but now he had added 10 kilos to his once lanky frame, and Upendra called him a prasadam addict. Unfortunately, however, while he basked in Upendra's warm association, Bill found Bali Mardan too intense. Bali Mardan would constantly attack Bill's well-grounded impersonal philosophical misunderstandings. Bill found him abrasive and wondered how much longer he could take it. As his second week in the temple drew to a close, Bill decided to move on. He drew up a sign that read Queensland, which he planned to flash at passing cars announcing his hitchhiking intentions to Australia's tropical north. He quietly packed his bags. But on the Sunday morning, Upendra asked Bill if he would cook the sweet rice for the Sunday feast. Bill, feeling obligated, dutifully stirred the large pot of milk until it condensed, thickened and reached the desired creamy consistency, a 3-hour feat. Wow, it's getting late, thought Bill as he put down the spoon. It's almost time for the Sunday feast. Bill decided to head for sunny Queensland after the feast, but by the time he had filled up with all his favourites, Simply Wonderfuls, halva and sweet rice, and came back for seconds, he was completely satisfied. The thought of moving on no longer appealed to him. He unpacked his bags and rededicated, hid a plate of Simply Wonderfuls in his locker for the forthcoming week. So, Upendra had gotten married only a week before leaving America for Sydney. He was by now missing his wife, Chitralekha, who was supposed to be joining him soon but was having visa problems. The police maintained their vigilance, and Upendra felt discouraged by these new austerities. Krishna consciousness was rigorous enough without having to deal with the law, he reasoned. Composing his thoughts and inserting some latest news clippings, Upendra wrote to Srila Prabhupada, who replied with more practical solutions and advice on 22nd of April 1970. Don't worry about your wife. She is trying to get an immigration visa and Madhu Dvisha is helping her. In the meantime, I am enclosing herewith a copy of the police officer's letter to me, and I hope this will help you to get police permission for Sankirtan. We are the best peaceful group in the world, and we are trying to bestow upon the people the supermost knowledge for humanity. Everyone should cooperate with us, but unfortunately, this is the age of Kali, and people are not very much eager to accept genuine things. So don't be disappointed. Do as you are doing now, and Krishna will help you without fail. To face difficulty in the course of preaching work is a kind of austerity. These difficulties do not go in vain. The more we face difficulties, the more we draw the attention of Krishna. So in that way, we shall be prepared to meet all kinds of difficulties in our preaching work. Such an attempt gives us a lift in our progressive march in Krishna consciousness. In my last letter to Bali Mardan, I have already written that I was very much anxious to hear from you. Now this letter has given me such relief. Thank you very much that you are working so hard for this movement, and surely Krishna will reward you sufficiently for your transcendental labor. Be blessed and preach. Prabhupada had added a handwritten postscript. Gargamuni has informed me yesterday that he has not yet received the $1,500. By April 1970, ISKCON consisted of 26 branches worldwide. It was clear that the devotees thought constantly of Prabhupada. He was also thinking constantly of them. Indeed, to say that Srila Prabhupada was grateful for his young disciples to take risks and perform austerities on his behalf was an understatement. Prabhupada wrote to Sridham Das, a young devotee opening a small center in Providence, Rhode Island. As soon as a center is opened and my disciples conduct it nicely, it gives me Vaikuntha bliss. Vamanadev is doing very nice in St. Louis, and I am sending herewith some pictures of his activities. So Bali Mardan and Upendra are doing in Sydney also. All this news is to me life-giving ambrosia. So the more you open branches, the more I increase my duration of life. Therefore, if you all, my students, want to live for some days more, go on opening nice branches, as many as possible. A royal visit to Sydney by Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, Princess Anne and Prince Charles for the Captain Cook bicentenary gave the devotees an added venue for chanting publicly. They chanted as crowds of thousands pressed forward to see the royal yacht berth at Sydney Harbour. Back to Godhead magazines were going fast as fireworks exploded overhead. On the 3rd of May, the Queen officially opened Sydney's new Kingsford Smith Airport. Almost a week later, on the 7th of May 1970, 20,000 peaceful demonstrators crammed inner city Sydney for the 2nd annual moratorium rally, protesting against Australians' continuing participation in the Vietnam War. The small band of devotees happily chanted as the surging crowds reached the town hall. Their attendance was not a political statement. Rather, they took this as yet another opportunity to spread the holy names of Krishna to as many people as would willingly hear. By mid-May, it was becoming obvious that the run-down little temple in Potts Point was too small. Burgeoning Sunday feast crowds meant great congestion. The guests could hardly fit into the living room and spilled out onto the veranda. The devotees looked for a new centre and soon located a house in the beachside suburb of Bondi. Bali Mardanu and Upendra discussed the possible move with the regular guests. For Chris and Christine it seemed too far away. Jorgen and Willie lived in the Cross, and the Bondi location meant extra travel. But the devotees considered the house, with its large backyard and roomy interior, quite suitable. Soon, the Sydney chapter of ISKCON had a new address. Number 298 Birrell Street was a small house in a busy thoroughfare lined with the distinctly Australian phenomenon, milk bars, as well as delicatessens, fruit and vegetable shops and grocers. Home for many Europeans who had migrated to Australia after the Second World War, the street now hosted the Hare Krishna temple. Before long, the regular guests had readjusted themselves to the new location. A small group continued attending the kirtans and classes on Sundays. As the guests arrived for the feast with their customary offering of fruits or flowers, the devotees would greet them at the door by carefully marking their foreheads with traditional Vaishnav tilak. Bali Mardan reported to Srila Prabhupada about the new centre. He was feeling more settled and had mustered renewed determination to stay in Sydney. Prabhupada was happy with his disciples' new resolve. I am glad to learn that you have decided to live in Sydney. Sydney is your jurisdiction, so you cannot leave this place unless there is a very urgent engagement in another place. You have got to organize this center very nicely. Please therefore do everything with enthusiasm. That will satisfy me and Krishna also, and as a result of which you will be satisfied transcendentally. This is our position. Prabhupada was also happy to hear that Upendra and Bali Mardan were trying harder to settle their differences, and that the Sydney centre had moved to a larger and better location. "All this is very good news," said Prabhupada, "and I beg to thank you very much." Upendra could now cook in a bigger and better equipped kitchen. His feast had become memorable events and attracted many new guests, but still his mind troubled him. Ever since his early days in San Francisco, Upendra had struggled with sex desire. Previously, Srila Prabhupada had advised him to stay away from rich foods, eat starvishly, take unspiced dal and chapatis without butter. But sometimes Upendra's problems seemed insurmountable. On a particularly low day, he wrote and told Srila Prabhupada of his weakness. Prabhupada replied, "I know you are a sincere servant of Krishna, so sometimes we may do something which is not very congenial, but Krishna is so kind that one who is engaged in his transcendental loving service is corrected immediately from within, as Krishna is sitting within everyone's heart. So you have gone there with a great responsibility on behalf of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and try to convince people about the importance of Krishna consciousness. That will make everything nice and in order, so far as responsibility is concerned. There is an action in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu to be executed by the devotee which is called Krishna Arte Akila Cheshta, which means to take all kinds of responsibilities for Krishna's sake. Sometimes I also think that let me go back to Vrindavan in that peaceful situation, to live without any responsibilities. Still, in this old age, I take the responsibility of managing our quite big institution now, and I have to reply to so many letters from different centers to give them instruction. As an old man, I can take relief from this work immediately, but for Krishna's sake, I am pulling on, even though there is sometimes personal inconveniences. So let us act in that way altogether for Krishna's sake." Chris and Christine still didn't think that a residential street in middle-class Bondi was a wise choice of location for a temple. Nevertheless, although still living in Potts Point, the couple took the bus to Bondi twice weekly and enjoyed hearing Upendra and Bali Mardan lecture. One day they decided to make an experiment. "Chris, we asked if we could spend just 10 days in the temple, and it was at that point that Bali Mardan sat us down and told us that there were 4 regulative principles: no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling, which needed to be adhered to for anyone living in the temple. We thought about those 4 principles, and we looked at each other and we said, yes, we could probably handle that for 10 days. We did, and after the 10 days were over, we said, thank you very much, and started hitchhiking out to Western Australia. By the time we got as far as some small mining town in Adelaide, where there was no vegetarian food available, we discovered that we had lost our taste for being footloose and fancy-free. Before meeting the devotees, we had enjoyed travelling all over the world, but now it didn't feel the same. So we turned around and hitchhiked back and presented ourselves at the temple door. Bali Mardan said, I knew you'd be back. We threw in our jobs and moved into the temple. By June 1970, 6 devotees were living in the Sydney temple. Although young and inexperienced, they were feeling a growing connection with Srila Prabhupada. Regular readings from Srila Prabhupada's Little Blue Abridged Gita and his new Nectar of Devotion kept them philosophically informed. The Krishna Consciousness album played day and night from a little record player in the lounge. Upendra's classes invariably turned into stories of his early days with Prabhupada in San Francisco. Upendra told of how he had offered Srila Prabhupada a used beach towel and his old baby blanket as Guru Dakshin at his initiation. Srila Prabhupada had been disgusted. What can I do with them? They are useless, he said. But then later Prabhupada had decided to use them as sitting mats for guests. Prabhupada was expert in engaging everything in Krishna's service. Upendra would say with his trademark grin. Sometimes Upendra would dramatically reenact the story of seeing Krishna everywhere. He described how he had liked to accompany Srila Prabhupada on his morning walks around Stowe Lake in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. Upon returning one morning, Upendra had asked, "Swamiji, what does the pure devotee see when he walks in the park?" Prabhupada had replied, "He sees Krishna. He sees these are Krishna's trees. This is Krishna's house. He sees everything as belonging to the Supreme Lord." "But if Krishna is everywhere," Upendra said, "does the pure devotee see Krishna on the wall on the right, and then the wall on the left, or in the corner, or in between every atom? Does he see one form of Krishna merge into another? Where does one form of Krishna begin and take off from the other form?" Srila Prabhupada answered that it was not like that. By way of example, he had pointed to his desk. "Do you see my spectacles?" Upendra answered, "Yes." "Whose spectacles are they?" Prabhupada asked. "They are yours," said Upendra. Prabhupada pointed to his shoes. "And what is that?" "Those are your shoes," said Upendra. So, Prabhupada explained, similarly, a pure devotee sees Krishna like that. Everything is Krishna's. This is how he sees Krishna everywhere. These intimate and heartwarming accounts by Upendra gave the young devotees a taste of real personal contact with Srila Prabhupada, despite being physically so far away. Occasionally, however, geographical isolation had its minor problems. Upendra, one time we got a newsletter from Los Angeles. It mentioned how a devotee had commented to Srila Prabhupada recently on how satisfying dal and chapatis were. "We would just live on them," he had said. And Prabhupada had replied, "That would be nice." So it became law. This is what Srila Prabhupada wanted, and our staple diet was now to be only dal and chapatis. We were horrified. How could you live on dal and chapatis? So we decided to cheat. We put every conceivable vegetable in the dal and gave every devotee a big pile of thick, hot, buttered chapatis. We went on that way for over a month, until we heard one day, just by the way, that someone had said, "Oh, we gave up that after a few days. It didn't work." But no one had bothered to tell us. The devotees had thought Jan a promising candidate for Krishna consciousness. Bali Madan had informed Srila Prabhupada about her in a letter, to which Prabhupada had replied, "Krishna has sent you already some help in the shape of a nice actress who is willing to help us in any way. Please try to convince this girl about our philosophy. You are already an experienced and sincere worker. If you try to convince her, Krishna will help you from within." Prabhupada had suggested that Jan be encouraged to read the books to strengthen her philosophical resolve. But somehow or other, she had stopped coming to the temple. Bali Mardan and Upendra felt disappointed. One Sunday feast in mid-June, however, Jan turned up at the temple with her parents. They had come from Melbourne to see her off on her departure for Los Angeles to further her acting career. Her parents found the temple interesting, and Jan, feeling her attraction for Krishna consciousness rejuvenated, regretted having not come around to the temple more often. Jan, once again in their company, I felt quite at home at the temple with the devotees, but now I was leaving. Before going, one of the girls gave me a ballpoint pen wrapped in blue silk as an offering for Srila Prabhupada. "Since you are going to LA and Prabhupada is there, could you give it to him?" she had asked. Upendra warned me not to fall into Maya in Los Angeles and said he would write to me. I thought, well, I can probably easily drop the pen off and that will be it. But when I got to Los Angeles, I investigated what career opportunities were available, and it appeared much more complicated than I ever expected. After a week, Upendra's letter arrived reminding me, "Please go to the temple." So I went to the temple on Watseka Avenue, only to give Srila Prabhupada that pen. But I never left. Bill had been living in the temple now for several months. It seemed obvious that he was serious about advancing in Krishna consciousness. Quiet but sincere, he was eager to serve. Bali Madan decided to recommend him for initiation. Soon Bill received his initiation beads, duly chanted on by Srila Prabhupada, and his new name, Upananda Das Brahmachari Ki Jai. As was his habit, Upendra regularly had questions for Srila Prabhupada. Now that there were boys and girls living together in the same temple, Upendra wondered what should be the standard of association. He also thought that it would be nice to call the devotee by temple names. Did Srila Prabhupada approve? What was the secret of speaking nicely on the philosophy of Krishna consciousness? And would it be possible for Srila Prabhupada to come and live in Australia for an extended period? All their inquiries were sent to Srila Prabhupada on the 15th of June. 10 days later, Srila Prabhupada replied, "We must stick to our Krishna consciousness business in all circumstances. This determination will make us successful, although, according to the Vedic system, there is a restriction that boys and girls should not freely mix. The brahmacharis are strictly prohibited to talk with young women. But in the Western countries, this rule is not valid. As such, we have to accept both boys and girls in the same standard. But if each of us follows the regulative principles and chanting of the mantra, hardly there will be any chance for sex indulgence. So we have to be a little careful about it, and Krishna will help us. I do not know why your wife has not yet got her visa. The devotees who are trying to join our movement may be called by some Vedic name, but ultimately, change of name will take place after some initiation. In the meantime, there is no harm in calling them by some suitable good names. Speaking, or anything, all depends on practice and study. I remember when I was first called for speaking by one of my senior godbrothers, I felt very much hesitating because I was not practiced to speak. Later on, by speaking and hearing or reading, I got experience, and now we can speak 45 minutes, 50 minutes, or 1 hour at a stretch. So you have to read our books very nicely and gather thoughts, and then you can speak for hours without any difficulty. It requires practice, so read your books carefully, especially Nectar of Devotion, now published, and practice speaking. It will be all right. The translating work cannot be transferred anywhere. It is not possible, because for my regular work, I require reference of the books, which means I shall have to carry with me so many books and other things. So I have no objection to do this, but by such action the work will suffer. But I can go to Australia when you are fully equipped for some time, and again come back. I have never seen Australia, so naturally I am inquisitive. But in that case you will have to provide for at least 2 men's double journey. I wish that your centre may be strengthened more and more, and if by next January, as you have stated, you'd like me to go there, certainly I shall go for some time." Prabhupada added, "The actress girl Jan has arrived here. She has presented me 1 ballpoint pen, and she has also transferred traveller's checks to the amount of $500 to the society. She appears to be a very nice, intelligent girl, and we are trying to engage her for some dramatical performances on the basis of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes." One day in the middle of July, Tirthapad Das arrived from London on Srila Prabhupada's recommendation. Mukunda had arranged his voyage to Australia via the British government's Assisted Passage program. For £10, British citizens could migrate to Australia, so he had come and was ready for active service. Tirthapad was expert in many fields. He was a good cook, a carpenter and a preacher, and especially he was expert at street sankirtan. But as the street chanting increased, so did police intimidation and arrests. Upendra informed Srila Prabhupada, who replied, regarding harassment of our devotees, "Yes, this is not a new thing in the history of the world that preachers are sometimes persecuted, but at the present status of civilization, I do not think anybody will be crucified like Lord Jesus Christ. Hiranyakashipu persecuted his own son, who was only 5 years old, so the demons and atheists are always prepared to give trouble to the devotees. Sometimes the demons, like Kamsa, are prepared to kill God even. During Lord Chaitanya's time, Thakur Haridas was also persecuted and put into jail. Not only that, he was whipped in 22 marketplaces, but still the demons could not come out successfully in the snubbing down of the Hare Krishna movement. So do not be worried about this. Go on about your business. Krishna will give you all help. Rest assured. Simply stick to your work seriously and sincerely." In a letter to Bali Marda on the same day, he added, "Upendra has requested me to go there by January next year, so if you can make all arrangements complete by that time, certainly I shall go and install the deities as I did in London." Great Transcendental Adventure Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki, 50th anniversary of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath Ki, Jai Jai Sri Radha Gopinath. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nithago.